Take off your walking dress, Miss Somercote. Madame has the ivory silk waiting. Phoebe stopped just inside the fitting room. For one strange second, she thought she had misheard. The fashionable West End dressmaker had served Lady Blanche for years, and Phoebe had been sent that morning with instructions to have the sleeves of an old evening gown altered before an upcoming dinner. Nothing had been said about ivory silk, yet there it was. A length of pale fabric lay across the fitting table, luminous in the spring light. Beside it rested a half-finished bodice with narrow seams, a bridal shape unmistakable even before Phoebe noticed the folded veil on the chair. Madame Bisset glanced up from her pins. We should begin quickly. Sir Geoffrey was particular that the gown be ready without delay. Phoebe did not move. Sir Geoffrey Harland? Of course. The assistant beside Madame lowered her eyes. Phoebe looked again at the bodice. The waist was cut to her size. Not approximately. Exactly. A colder understanding settled through her. These are my measurements. Madame smiled as though that proved something pleasing. Lady Blanche had the figures from your morning gown copied over. Very sensible. We saved several days. You copied measurements from an old order. Yes, Sir Geoffrey paid the deposit yesterday, and Lady Blanche chose the silk herself. Phoebe placed one gloved hand on the back of a chair. No one had asked whether she wished to marry Sir Geoffrey. No proposal had been made. There had been suggestions, certainly. Lady Blanche had praised his estate, his income, his respectable habits, and his willingness to overlook the fact that Phoebe was already 31. Phoebe had answered none of those speeches as though they were negotiations. Apparently Blanche had. Madame Bisset lifted the bodice. If you will step behind the screen, Miss Somercote. No, the single word was quiet. Madame blinked. Phoebe removed her gloves one finger at a time and placed them on the table. There has been a misunderstanding. I am not engaged to Sir Geoffrey. The assistant looked toward her mistress. Madame gave a brittle little laugh. Families often prefer discretion before announcements. My family may prefer whatever it likes. I have not accepted him. The smile disappeared. Phoebe saw the discomfort then, not cruelty, not even disbelief, only the awkwardness of a tradeswoman who had received instructions from people with money, and rank enough to make obedience seem safer than questions. I am sorry Lady Blanche involved you in this, Phoebe said, but I will not be fitted for that gown. A loose pin had caught at the edge of the silk. Phoebe opened her reticule and took out a small carved boxwood needle case, polished smooth by years of use. It had belonged to her mother. She removed the pin carefully so it would not snag the fabric, returned it to Madame's cushion, and closed the little case again. The action was ordinary. That was what steadied her. She had spent years mending hems, household tempers, awkward dinners, neglected correspondence, servants' small crises, and every inconvenience Lady Blanche considered beneath her notice. But not this. Not a marriage. Madame Bisset lowered the bodice. Miss Somercote, Sir Geoffrey has already paid a considerable sum. Then I hope he will learn to inquire before purchasing a bride's clothes. Phoebe gathered her gloves. She left the ivory silk untouched. By the time she returned to Somercote House in Mayfair, Lady Blanche was waiting in the drawing room. She did not ask how the fitting had gone. So, Blanche said, "You made a spectacle of yourself." Phoebe closed the door behind her. Lady Blanche sat upright on the green damask sofa, one hand resting on her cane, though she did not require it for walking indoors. She had always possessed a gift for making furniture seem like a throne. You ordered a bridal gown in my name. I made necessary arrangements. You made them without speaking to me. I have spoken to you for months. You simply chose not to understand. Phoebe remained standing. Blanche's mouth tightened. Sir Geoffrey is offering you security. At your age, with no fortune worth mentioning and no parents to advise you, gratitude would be more becoming than obstinacy. I am not ungrateful for shelter. Then prove it. Phoebe knew the answer before Blanche spoke again. You will marry Sir Geoffrey, or you will no longer remain beneath this roof. Silence settled between them. Blanche watched her closely, perhaps expecting tears, pleading, some final retreat into the habits of dependence. Phoebe felt fear. It was sharp and practical. Where would she sleep? How long would her coins last? Which respectable household might employ a woman of good birth who had abruptly left her relation's home? The questions came quickly, but none of them changed the answer. Phoebe crossed to the escritoire. From her pocket, she removed the small ring of household keys Blanche had entrusted to her years ago. Linen closet, china cupboard, morning room desk, pantry inventory. The tiny metal sounds seemed unnaturally loud as she placed them on the polished wood. Lady Blanche stared. What are you doing? You said Sir Geoffrey or nothing. Do not be theatrical. I am not. Phoebe picked up her reticule. Phoebe. For the first time, Blanche sounded uncertain. Phoebe looked at the room she had kept orderly through illnesses, dinners, morning calls, unpaid bills, difficult servants, and Blanche's endless complaints. She had been useful here. She had mistaken usefulness for belonging far too long. I hope you will tell Mrs. Dale that the linen count is complete, she said. And the grocer's account for March is in the second drawer. Blanche rose. If you walk out now, you will have nothing. Phoebe met her gaze. If remaining requires me to become someone's wife without being asked, then I have less than nothing already. She went upstairs once, only once. She packed one change of linen, her calling cards, the boxwood needle case, and the few coins she possessed. Everything fit into a small reticule, and a modest parcel, no larger than a servant, might carry on an errand. When she descended, Blanche did not come into the hall. Phoebe opened the front door herself. A carriage stood beyond the steps. Lady Esther Redbourne was already seated within it. Beside the carriage, Julian Redbourne, Duke of Keldhurst, had one gloved hand resting on the door. Phoebe stopped. Earlier that morning, before she had returned from the dressmaker, Julian had told his sister exactly what he intended. If Miss Somercote will have me, he had said, I mean to ask her to become my wife. Phoebe knew none of that. She only knew the Duke was looking at the small parcel in her hand, then at the open doorway behind her. He understood enough not to ask whether she had quarrelled. Lady Esther leaned forward. Miss Somercote, will you come with me? Phoebe hesitated. For tonight, Esther added. Nothing more need be decided. That mattered. Phoebe descended the damp steps. At the carriage, her shoe slipped barely half an inch. Her hand caught Julian's sleeve by instinct. He did not seize her. He merely stood steady beneath her touch. Phoebe released him at once. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Julian opened the carriage door wider. Lady Esther offered her hand from inside. Phoebe entered. I can accept 3 nights, she said, no longer, not until I know what I am to do. Esther nodded. 3 nights. Julian closed the door. Phoebe sat with her reticule in her lap as the carriage pulled away from Somercote House. Behind her, she had left almost everything. What she did not know was that the Duke, watching the carriage depart, had already decided there was only one future he wanted. Whether she would ever choose, it was another matter entirely. Lady Esther's house was quieter than Somercote House. Not grander, though it easily could have been. The Duke of Keldhurst's sister had enough consequence to fill every room with silk, silver, and visiting cards if she wished. Instead, her Mayfair drawing room felt orderly rather than theatrical. Books were left open where they had actually been read. A work basket sat beside the fire. Someone had forgotten a pair of spectacles on the pianoforte. Phoebe noticed all of this before she allowed herself to sit. Lady Esther noticed something else. You may stop standing as though I intend to invoice you for the chair. Phoebe looked at her. Esther's mouth curved. Julian says I have no talent for making guests comfortable. From the window, the Duke said, I said you make them comfortable with alarming efficiency. You see, Esther replied. Insufferable. Phoebe almost smiled. Almost. She set her reticule carefully beside her chair. 3 nights. She had said it aloud in the carriage, and she meant to honor it. I am grateful, she said, but I should like to make one thing clear. Before gratitude becomes confused with permanence. Julian turned from the window. Esther only nodded. I need a position, Phoebe continued. Companion reader, secretary if anyone would have me. I can manage household correspondence, accounts, inventories, charitable subscriptions. I have written letters for Lady Blanche for years. Then write some for yourself, Esther said. Phoebe blinked. Esther pointed toward the escritoire. There is paper in the second drawer. My house is yours for 3 nights. What you do with them is your affair. Something tightened unexpectedly in Phoebe's throat. Not pity. That would have been easier to resist. Choice was harder. She rose, crossed to the desk, and began making a list. Mrs. Vale in Bedford Square had once said she needed a reader during the winter months. Lady Markham's widowed sister had arthritis in both hands and dictated correspondence. A former acquaintance of Phoebe's mother had married into a respectable Hampshire family and might know of someone seeking a companion. Phoebe wrote 3 letters before luncheon. Julian did not hover. That impressed her more than any offer of money could have done. He spent part of the morning in Esther's library, then left the house altogether. When he returned shortly before 2, he carried no packet, no purse, no triumphant solution to place before Phoebe as though the matter of her future had already been settled. He did, however, ask, Have you eaten? Phoebe glanced at the untouched tray beside her letters. That was not the question I expected from a duke. I have others. Most are worse. Esther looked up from her book. He has been saving them since Eton. Julian ignored her. Have you? Not yet. Then I shall refrain from offering advice until you are fortified enough to reject it. This time, Phoebe did smile. It escaped before she could stop it. Julian's expression changed only slightly, but enough that she saw he had been hoping for exactly that. The realization unsettled her. Not unpleasantly. That was worse. After luncheon, Julian found her in the morning room, sealing her 3rd letter. I have one practical matter to ask, he said. Phoebe laid down the wax. Ask, would you like anything brought from Somercote House? Her shoulders stiffened. I do not mean to send men through the place on my authority, he added at once. Lady Esther's servants can collect whatever you name, but only with your written request. Phoebe studied him. No trunks taken without my knowledge. No discussions with Lady Blanche about what belongs to me. No argument that I require more than I request. His mouth twitched. That last condition wounds my natural arrogance, but I shall survive. Phoebe looked down before the smile could return too openly. I want my dark blue walking dress, 2-day gowns, my books and the writing box from my room, then write it and nothing else. Nothing else, she did. By late afternoon, one of Esther's footmen carried the folded instruction away. Julian did not touch it. That mattered too. The second morning brought Phoebe a reply. Mrs. Vale remembered her kindly and would receive her for an interview the following week. The position was not certain, but it was respectable and paid enough to support modest lodgings. Phoebe read the letter twice a week. It was longer than her promised 3 nights, but it was a road forward. Lady Esther solved the difficulty before Phoebe could raise it. You may remain until the interview. Phoebe began. I said 3 nights, and I heard you. I am now offering 4 more. I cannot accept endless hospitality. Then help me with the parish subscription correspondence and call it theft if I refuse to pay you. Phoebe stared. Esther lifted one brow. From across the breakfast table, Julian said, I advise surrender. My sister has never lost a siege involving stationery. Phoebe laughed again. The sound surprised all 3 of them, though only Esther showed it. A folded note arrived before breakfast ended. The servant presented it to Phoebe. She recognized Lady Blanche's hand immediately. The message contained no greeting. Return before tomorrow evening. Apologize to Sir Geoffrey. Accept what has been arranged. This foolishness need go no further. Phoebe read it once, then she folded it along the original crease. Would you like an answer sent? Esther asked. No. Phoebe handed it back. Return it unanswered, please. Julian said nothing until the servant had gone. Then, very quietly, Good. Phoebe looked at him. I do not require approval, Your Grace. No, his voice remained mild. But you have mine anyway. She should have found that presumptuous. Instead, it warmed something she was not prepared to examine. Later, in Esther's library, Julian stood with one hand braced against the mantel while his sister closed the door. Blanche knew, he said. Esther looked up sharply. Knew what? That I meant to speak about Phoebe. You never told her why. I requested a private interview concerning Miss Somercote. Blanche refused it before Phoebe returned from the dressmaker. Esther went still. Julian's earlier humor vanished. The ultimatum came within hours. You think she guessed? I think Blanche has spent years deciding what happens to Phoebe. A duke asking for a private conversation about her would not have seemed harmless. Esther's expression hardened. And Sir Geoffrey? I do not know yet. Julian looked toward the closed door, beyond which Phoebe sat writing letters that might take her entirely out of his reach. He had already decided what he wanted, but for the first time, he began to suspect someone else had understood that decision, before the woman most entitled to know it ever had. By the fourth morning, Phoebe had begun to understand the danger of Lady Esther's kindness. It did not ask anything of her. That made it much harder to defend against. She sat at the small writing table in the morning room with Mrs. Vale's letter open beside her. The interview remained fixed for the following week. Until then, Phoebe had begun helping Lady Esther answer charitable correspondence in exchange for a modest payment Esther insisted was wages, not gratitude. Phoebe had protested once. Esther had looked offended. You have corrected 3 subscription lists, caught 2 repeated names, and prevented me from sending a widow in Clerkenwell the wrong parcel. If that is not work, then I have been greatly misunderstanding employment. Phoebe had accepted the argument. More importantly, she had accepted the coins. They were not Julian's. They were earned. That distinction settled something inside her. The interview with Mrs. Vale now seemed less like an escape and more like a choice. If the position suited her, she could take it. If it did not, she would continue looking. For the first time in years, her future felt uncertain in a way that belonged to her. Lady Esther entered carrying her gloves. You have been bent over those lists since breakfast. I am nearly finished. That is exactly what industrious people always say before becoming intolerable. Phoebe looked up. Esther smiled. Come walking with me. Phoebe hesitated only long enough to glance at the page. You may bring your virtue home afterward, Esther added. A quarter of an hour later, they were outside. Julian joined them at the corner of the square. Phoebe had not known he would. That realization brought a small, unreasonable awareness of the way he looked in daylight rather than across drawing rooms. His coat was dark, his gloves pale, his hat tucked briefly beneath one arm as he bowed to Esther and then to her. Miss Somercote, Your Grace. Lady Esther looked between them. If either of you begins speaking about weather, I shall abandon you both. Julian's mouth curved. You have always demanded danger from conversation. I demand usefulness. Then we are both ruined. Phoebe smiled despite herself. They walked with Esther beside them at first. London moved around them in the ordinary rhythm of late morning. Carriages rolled past. A nursemaid guided 2 children away from a muddy gutter. A pair of gentlemen lifted their hats to Esther. Julian said very little. That was unlike him. Phoebe noticed. After several minutes, Esther slowed to exchange greetings with an acquaintance near a garden gate. She remained close enough to satisfy propriety, but far enough to give Phoebe and Julian a few moments without an audience to every word. Phoebe looked at him. "You are unusually quiet. I had hoped restraint might improve my reputation. It has not yet." His expression brightened. "There you are. There who is. The woman who has begun insulting me. I was making an observation. Much more dangerous." She almost laughed, but something in his face stopped her. The humor was still there, only thinner. Phoebe looked ahead. "You wished to speak to Lady Blanche before I left." Julian's silence changed. Phoebe continued. "Lady Esther did not tell me why, only that you had asked for a private interview concerning me. She should not have needed to tell you at all. She did not gossip. I asked whether Lady Blanche had given any reason for forcing the matter with Sir Geoffrey so suddenly." Julian nodded. "I did ask to speak with her. Before I returned from the dressmaker?" "Yes, and she refused." "Yes." Phoebe waited. He did not fill the silence. "What did you intend to discuss?" Julian looked toward the path ahead. "Something that concerned you." "That is not an answer." "No." She turned her head. He met her eyes then. For once, there was no quick remark ready to soften the moment. "I would rather not tell you half a truth, merely because the whole truth would be inconvenient to say here." Phoebe's pulse shifted. She disliked secrets. She disliked them more when they were dressed as protection. But this did not feel exactly like that. He was not telling her she could not know. He was telling her he would not pretend to answer. "That is almost respectable," she said. His smile returned faintly. "High praise." They walked a few more steps. Then Julian said, "I make jokes when I do not wish people to see what matters to me." Phoebe looked at him again. The admission seemed to cost him more than she expected. "I had noticed the jokes. I had hoped you had missed the cowardice beneath them. I would not call wit cowardice. You might, if you had seen how often I have used it as a door." Phoebe said nothing. Julian continued, more quietly. "A difficult conversation begins. I make someone laugh, and by the time they recover I have escaped whatever I did not wish to say. And today I appear to have misplaced the exit." Something in Phoebe's chest tightened. Esther was still only several yards behind them. There was nothing improper in the moment, yet it felt more intimate than anything that had passed between them. Julian slowed slightly and offered his arm, not because the pavement was dangerous, not because she required assistance, simply because they were walking together. Phoebe looked at the offered arm. 4 days earlier, she had caught his sleeve because she nearly slipped. This was different. So was her answer. She placed her hand lightly through his arm. Julian did not react with triumph or surprise, but the line of his shoulders eased. They continued walking. Phoebe could feel the controlled steadiness of him beneath her fingers. "You said you misplaced your exit," she said. "I did. Perhaps Lady Esther stole it. That would explain much of my life." Phoebe laughed. This time, Julian laughed too. The sound relieved the tension without destroying it. After a moment, Phoebe said, "My mother kept a boxwood needle case." Julian glanced down at her. "The one you carried when you left?" "Yes." She did not ask how he had noticed. "She taught me to mend my own things when I was a girl. Once I complained, because I had been given a dress I hated and expected to alter it until it pleased everyone else." "What did she say?" Phoebe smiled at the memory. "She said, 'Mend what you choose to keep, Phoebe. You are not required to repair everything placed into your hands.'" Julian was quiet. "That sounds like excellent advice. I spent several years ignoring it. And now," Phoebe's fingers rested more firmly on his arm, "now I am trying to improve." Julian looked ahead. "So am I." When they returned to Lady Esther's house, a servant was waiting in the hall with 2 calling cards and a message. Esther read it first. Her expression cooled. "What is it?" Phoebe asked. "Lady Blanche has been making calls." Phoebe removed her gloves slowly. "About me. She has been telling people you reacted irrationally to a perfectly respectable understanding with Sir Geoffrey." Phoebe felt heat rise beneath her collar. Understanding. Julian's face had gone very still. Esther held up the second card, and apparently Sir Geoffrey Harland has obtained an invitation to the same performance at the King's Theatre we are attending tomorrow evening. Phoebe looked from Esther to Julian. Julian did not reach for her. He did not tell her not to go. He only asked, "Do you still wish to attend?" Phoebe thought of the ivory silk, of the household keys on the escritoire, of her mother's small boxwood needle case. Then she lifted her chin. "Yes." Julian nodded once. "Then we attend." The King's Theatre glittered with candlelight, jewels, and the restless attention of people who had come as much to observe one another as to hear the opera. Phoebe knew that before she entered. She also knew Lady Blanche would be there. What she had not known was how deliberately her aunt intended to make herself impossible to avoid. Lady Esther's box was well placed, but not ostentatious. Julian sat behind them during the first act, quiet enough that Phoebe became aware of his silence more than she would have noticed conversation. She watched the stage. At least, she tried. Below them, heads turned in the familiar rhythm of society, assessing society. A woman in green silk whispered behind her fan. Two gentlemen in the opposite box looked toward Phoebe, then toward Julian. Lady Blanche had indeed been making calls. Phoebe kept her expression composed. When the interval came, Esther touched her arm. "You need not leave the box. I know. It would have been easy to remain." That was precisely why Phoebe rose. "If I hide tonight," she said, "Blanche will say I am ashamed tomorrow." Julian stood as well. He did not say, "Then I shall go before you." He simply asked, "Would you like company?" Phoebe met his eyes. Yes. The crush room was crowded enough to make private conversation nearly impossible and public injury very easy. Lady Blanche waited beside one of the columns. Sir Geoffrey Harland stood with her. He was broad through the shoulders, silver beginning at his temples. Dressed with the immaculate care of a man who believed respectability could be measured by tailoring. Phoebe had met him often enough to know that his politeness became cold whenever anyone disagreed with him. His gaze settled on Julian first, then Phoebe. "Miss Somercote." "Sir Geoffrey." Lady Blanche's smile contained no warmth. "Phoebe, how fortunate. We have been hoping to correct this unfortunate misunderstanding before it becomes still more embarrassing." Several nearby conversations quieted. Not fully. Just enough. Phoebe understood at once that the setting was no accident. "What misunderstanding?" she asked. Sir Geoffrey looked pained by the necessity of explaining something he considered obvious. "Our understanding." There was no understanding. A woman near Lady Blanche lowered her fan. Sir Geoffrey's jaw tightened. Preparations for our marriage had already begun. Phoebe felt the first movement of alarm beneath her ribs. Lady Blanche said smoothly, "Surely you do not intend to deny that." "I intend to deny anything that is untrue." Sir Geoffrey's expression hardened further. "I paid a substantial deposit toward your bridal clothes." The words carried. They were meant to. Phoebe saw, in a series of small glances around the room, exactly what everyone else saw: a respectable baronet, a bridal gown, money already spent, a dependent woman who had left her aunt's house, and now a duke standing close behind her. Lady Blanche turned slightly, ensuring that Julian could hear every word. Phoebe showed no objection to Sir Geoffrey's attentions until His Grace began taking an unusual interest in her. There it was, the real accusation, not ingratitude, calculation. Phoebe had discarded a baronet because a duke might be available. A flush climbed her neck, but she did not step backward. Julian moved once, only half a pace. Phoebe lifted one hand without looking at him. He stopped. She would answer this herself. "I never accepted Sir Geoffrey." Her voice was not loud, but the people nearest them heard. "I never gave Lady Blanche permission to accept him for me. I never authorized bridal clothes. I did not even know a wedding gown existed until I was taken to the dressmaker and shown one." Sir Geoffrey stared at her. That is absurd. The gown was made to your measurements. The statement landed more effectively than Blanche's accusation. Phoebe knew it from the sudden shift around them. Measurements suggested fittings, selections, participation, consent disguised as tailoring. She saw again the ivory bodice on Madame Bissess's table, the narrow waist, the exact sleeve, the familiar proportion through the shoulders. Her old morning gown, Madame had told her plainly. We had the figures copied over. Phoebe turned to Sir Geoffrey. Who provided those measurements? He frowned. What? The measurements for the gown. Who provided them? Lady Blanche's face changed. Barely, but Phoebe saw it. Sir Geoffrey did not. Lady Blanche arranged those details because they were copied from an older order. A pause. Phoebe continued, steadier now. I was not measured for that bridal gown. I did not choose its silk. I did not order it. I did not approve it. The fact that someone possessed my measurements is not proof that I consented to marriage. Someone behind Sir Geoffrey murmured. Lady Blanche stepped in quickly. This is becoming indecently dramatic. No, Phoebe said. It became indecent when a bridal gown was ordered for a woman who had never agreed to be a bride. For the first time, Blanche had no immediate reply. Sir Geoffrey looked toward Julian. Perhaps he expected the Duke to rescue the situation with rank. Perhaps he hoped to accuse him of doing so. Julian gave him neither satisfaction. He said only, "There is one fact I can speak to personally." Blanche's eyes narrowed. Julian's tone remained level. Miss Somercote did not seek me out when she left your house. I saw her emerge carrying one small reticule and a parcel. My sister offered her a place in her carriage. Sir Geoffrey said, Your Grace, surely you understand appearances. I understand facts. The words were mild. That made them sharper. Julian continued, I will not invent evidence for Miss Somercote. She plainly does not require it. Phoebe felt something in her chest ease. Not because he had defended her, because he had defended only what he knew. He had not taken her story out of her hands. Lady Esther moved to Phoebe's side. We should return to our box. Phoebe looked once more at Blanche. Her aunt's composure had returned, but the pleasure had gone from it. Sir Geoffrey, however, looked more offended than uncertain. He still believed money spent constituted intention shared. Phoebe turned away. The second act passed in fragments. Music swelled below them. Applause rose. Phoebe heard almost none of it. She kept thinking about the measurements. An older order. If the dressmaker had kept records, there would be a date. Perhaps even the name of the person who gave instructions. The thought steadied her more than indignation did. Evidence was preferable to outrage. By the time Lady Esther's carriage drew away from the theatre, Phoebe was exhausted. Esther sat opposite them, unusually silent. Julian occupied the seat beside Phoebe. Street lamps passed beyond the window in intervals of gold and darkness. No one spoke. Julian's hand rested loosely on his knee. Phoebe looked at it, then at the space between them. She turned her own gloved palm upward on the seat. An invitation. Nothing more, Julian saw. He did not seize her hand. He placed his over it gently. Warmth settled through the thin leather of their gloves. The carriage rolled through one street. Then another. Neither moved. Phoebe watched the passing lamps and allowed herself, for once, not to carry the whole weight of the evening alone. At last Esther said quietly, Blanche spoke to me before we left. Phoebe looked up. Something in Esther's face made Julian's hand tighten almost imperceptibly over hers. What did she say? Phoebe asked. Esther hesitated. Then the answer came from behind them. Lady Blanche's voice, remembered exactly as Phoebe had heard it near the cloakroom moments before departure. You may tell Phoebe this much. His Grace's interest did not begin after she left my house. Phoebe went still. Her hand remained beneath Julian's. But now she looked at him. Julian did not look away. The carriage seemed suddenly too small. Phoebe looked at Julian's hand over hers, then at his face. His expression had changed. There was no humor in it now, No careful lightness, only recognition. Phoebe withdrew her hand. Julian let her go at once. Lady Esther glanced between them. Phoebe. Not here, Phoebe said. Her voice was calm enough to surprise her. She turned toward the carriage window and watched the lamps pass until they reached Esther's house. No one spoke again. Inside, Esther dismissed the servants from the drawing room and left the doors to the adjoining room open. She did not pretend Phoebe and Julian required privacy beyond propriety, but neither did she sit between them like a magistrate. Phoebe remained standing. Julian did the same. She set her gloves on the table. Was Lady Blanche telling the truth? Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Phoebe had thought perhaps certainty would be easier than suspicion. It was not. Julian continued before she could speak. Before you returned from Madame Bissess, I had already decided that I wished to ask whether you would consider marrying me. Phoebe's throat tightened, not because the words were unwelcome. That was part of what made them dangerous. You had decided. I had decided what I wanted. That is not quite the same thing. No, he did not try to soften it. Phoebe looked toward Esther. You knew. Esther's expression was unhappy. He told me that morning. And Lady Blanche? I never told her, Julian said. I requested an interview with her concerning you. I intended to ask whether she knew of any objection I ought to understand before approaching you directly. Phoebe frowned. You meant to ask her permission? No, you are 31 years old. I meant to observe the forms without pretending they gave anyone authority over your answer. That should have reassured her. Instead, another thought came. Lady Blanche refused to see you. Yes, and within hours, she gave me the choice of Sir Geoffrey or the street. Julian's jaw tightened. Yes, Phoebe walked toward the fireplace, though no fire was needed. She rested her fingertips against the mantel. The pieces arranged themselves with humiliating neatness. Blanche had seen Julian's interest. Blanche had already begun preparing the marriage to Sir Geoffrey. If Julian's purpose became known before that arrangement was secured, Sir Geoffrey might lose patience. Blanche might lose whatever benefit his marriage promised her. Phoebe closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, Julian had not moved closer. That mattered. Still, the question pressing hardest against her had little to do with Blanche. She turned. Why did you not tell me? Julian's expression shifted. I intended to. When? He was silent. Phoebe waited. At first, he said, I thought the moment was impossible. You had just left your home. You were angry, frightened, and determined not to owe anyone anything. To tell you then that I wished to marry you seemed very close to placing another weight upon you. That much I understand. He nodded once. Phoebe continued. But I have been beneath your sister's roof for a week. Nearly. You knew Lady Blanche may have guessed your intention. You knew the speed of her ultimatum troubled you. You knew I was trying to understand why everything happened so quickly. Julian looked down for a moment. Yes, and still you said nothing. Yes, the honesty stung more than evasion would have. Phoebe folded her hands tightly before her. I had just discovered that one person had ordered a wedding gown for me, another had paid for it, and both apparently thought my agreement could be supplied later. Julian's face went still. Phoebe went on. Then I discover that you had also privately decided upon marriage before I knew anything of it. He drew breath. I did not order anything. I did not speak for you. I know. That stopped him. Phoebe's voice softened, but not enough to make the question harmless. That is why this is difficult. Julian looked at her fully. She continued. I do not think you are, Sir Geoffrey. I do not think wishing to marry me was wrong. I am asking why. Once I was living under your sister's protection and relying upon her household, you allowed me to remain ignorant of something that might change how I understood your help. The words landed. Julian's shoulders lowered very slightly. For the first time since she had known him, he looked not merely serious, but ashamed. I thought my intentions were honorable, he said. Phoebe waited. And because I knew I would never compel you, I convinced myself that my private certainty could do you no harm. He looked toward the gloves she had placed between them. I was wrong. Phoebe said nothing. Julian did not come closer. I should have told you as soon as it became clear that Blanche may have acted because she suspected my purpose. Perhaps sooner. I should certainly not have allowed you to discover it from her. A faint bitterness crossed his mouth. I have spent years assuming that if I intend to behave well, I am therefore behaving well. Esther looked away. Phoebe remained very still. Julian continued. I am sorry. No justification followed. No mention of rank, custom, or protection. Only the apology. Phoebe had prepared herself to argue against reasons. She had not prepared herself for their absence. Julian looked at her. I will not ask you to answer a question I have not yet properly asked. Something in Phoebe's chest tightened again, and I will not ask it now. She lifted her eyes to his. Why not? Because tonight you learned that one man paid for a wedding gown you never requested, and another man privately imagined a marriage you had never been told about. His voice was quieter now. I would rather endure uncertainty than make my hope feel like another arrangement closing around you. Phoebe swallowed. Julian went on. If you take Mrs. Vale's position next week, I will still help correct what Blanche and Sir Geoffrey have said. If you wish my help, if you choose another household, the same. If you decide you want nothing romantic from me at all, the same. Phoebe searched his face. You would still stand against the lie? Yes. Even if there were nothing in it for you. A shadow of his old wit appeared, but he did not use it. Yes. Phoebe looked away. She had expected anger to make her choices easier. Instead, Julian's apology had left the decision where it belonged, with her. That was more frightening, and far more precious. The next morning, Phoebe told Lady Esther she would remain until her interview with Mrs. Vale. She said it before Julian arrived. Esther looked pleased, but asked no questions. I do not want to run merely to prove that I can, Phoebe explained. That would still mean someone else's conduct had chosen my direction. Esther nodded. A very expensive lesson in independence. Phoebe almost smiled. I appear to be learning several. Later, while sorting correspondence at the writing table, she found herself thinking not of Julian, but of Madame Bisset. The measurements. Sir Geoffrey had insisted the gown proved agreement because it fit her. But Madame had told Phoebe exactly how that had happened. The figures had been copied from an older morning gown order. Phoebe stopped writing. If the old measurements had been copied, then someone must have instructed the dressmaker to use them. Someone had placed the bridal order. Someone had selected the silk. Someone had given Sir Geoffrey's payment a purpose. And none of those people had been Phoebe. She set down her pen. Lady Esther looked up from across the room. What is it? Phoebe rose. I need to return to Madame Bisset. Esther's brows lifted. Phoebe's voice was steady. I want to know whose name was on that order. Madame Bisset did not look pleased to see Phoebe again. She looked nervous. That was different. Lady Esther accompanied Phoebe into the same fitting room where the ivory silk had first waited for her. The unfinished bridal gown was gone from the central table, but Phoebe recognized the bolt of fabric on a shelf near the window. Madame Bisset folded her hands. Miss Somercote, I hope there has not been some further difficulty. There has, Phoebe said, but I do not intend to create one for you. Madame's shoulders eased only slightly. Phoebe removed her gloves. I need to see the original order for the bridal gown. A pause. The order? Yes. Madame glanced toward Lady Esther. Esther said, Miss Somercote is asking on her own behalf. I understand, my lady, Phoebe continued. Sir Geoffrey publicly stated that the gown had been made to my measurements as proof that I had agreed to marry him. You told me those measurements came from an earlier order. They did. I would like to know who instructed you to use them. Madame hesitated. Phoebe saw the calculation behind her eyes. A tradeswoman depended upon patronage. Lady Blanche was a customer. Sir Geoffrey had money. Lady Esther had social consequence. Phoebe wanted none of them to become weapons. "If you cannot show me the paper itself," she said, "tell me only what you are able to say truthfully." Madame studied her for a moment. Then she crossed to a cabinet and unlocked the second drawer. From it, she removed a packet tied with narrow cord. She laid several cards on the table before selecting one. An ivory silk swatch was fixed to its upper corner. Phoebe recognized the fabric immediately. Her pulse quickened. Madame turned the card toward her. There was Phoebe's name, Miss Phoebe Somercote. Below it were measurements: bust, waist, sleeve, length. Beside them in another hand was a short notation: measurements copied from mourning order. Phoebe leaned closer. "May I?" Madame nodded. Phoebe did not pick up the card. She read where it lay. Lady Blanche Somercote appeared beneath the instruction line. Sir Geoffrey Harland's name stood beside the deposit entry, and above both was the date. Phoebe looked at it twice. 3 days before Lady Blanche had ever told her there was supposedly to be a marriage. 3 days before Phoebe had entered this room and discovered the gown. Lady Esther drew in a quiet breath. Phoebe asked, "Was I present when this order was placed?" "No." "Did I select the silk?" "No." "Did I approve the design?" "No." "Did I sign anything?" Madame Bisset shook her head. "There is no signature from you." Phoebe looked down at the card. Something inside her settled. Not because the truth was dramatic. Because it was plain. Someone had ordered a wedding gown for her. Someone else had paid for it. Her body had been measured by memory, through figures copied from an old garment, and she had been expected to arrive afterward and become the bride those arrangements required. Madame said carefully, "Lady Blanche told me the family had agreed." Phoebe met her eyes. "I believe you." The modiste looked startled. "I do not blame you for believing a lady speaking for her household," Phoebe continued. "But when I came here, did I behave as though I knew of an engagement?" "No." "Did I agree to the fitting?" "No." Madame's voice became firmer. "You refused immediately. You would not even put on the bodice." Lady Esther looked at Phoebe. There was no triumph in her expression, only recognition. Phoebe finally touched the edge of the table. "Would you be willing to say exactly that again before Lady Blanche and Sir Geoffrey?" Madame's face tightened before them and before a small number of people who heard the accusation at the theatre. Madame looked toward her order book. Then back at Phoebe. "If my work is being used as proof that you consented when you did not, then yes." Phoebe let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Thank you." The card remained on the table. Phoebe did not take it. Madame Bisset refastened it with the other records and returned the packet to the cabinet. Lady Esther noticed. "So the order stays here?" "Yes, my lady." Phoebe nodded. "That is where it belongs." When they returned to Esther's house, Phoebe did not ask whether Julian was there. She wrote him a note. "Your Grace, if you are free this afternoon, I would like to speak with you." P.S. Phoebe looked at the initials before sealing the paper. Then she gave it to a servant. Julian arrived less than an hour later. He met Phoebe and Esther in the drawing room. This time his first question was not whether she was safe. It was not what Blanche had done. It was not even whether the dressmaker had confirmed her suspicions. He looked at Phoebe and asked, "What did you learn?" She told him. The copied measurements, Lady Blanche's instruction, Sir Geoffrey's deposit, the date, the absence of Phoebe's signature, Madame Bisset's willingness to state that Phoebe had refused the gown the moment she saw it. Julian listened without interruption. When she finished, anger appeared in his face, quiet and unmistakable. But he did not act on it. "What do you wish done?" he asked. Phoebe stared at him. A week earlier, he might have said he would summon someone, speak to someone, settle something. Now he simply waited. Phoebe looked toward the window. "Lady Blanche accused me in public." "Yes, Sir Geoffrey allowed people to believe I had accepted him." Yes, I do not want a private apology that becomes another version of the truth by next week. Julian's expression did not change. What do you want? A correction before people who heard the accusation. Then that is what should happen. Phoebe turned back to him. No threats. No use of your rank to frighten Madame Bisset. Certainly not, and Sir Geoffrey must answer for himself. Julian nodded, as must Lady Blanche. Phoebe felt something loosen inside her. It was not victory, not yet. It was trust returning by inches. Julian had not anticipated her wishes. He had asked. She crossed the space between them before she fully understood she meant to. He went still. Phoebe stopped close enough to seize her question in his face. Then she placed her arms around him. For one heartbeat, Julian did nothing. He gave her time to change her mind. She did not. His arms came around her carefully. The embrace was warm, restrained, and astonishingly quiet. Phoebe closed her eyes. She was not thanking him. She was not surrendering. She was choosing this moment. When she drew back, Julian let her go at once. Lady Esther, standing by the escritoire, became deeply interested in arranging papers that required no arrangement. Phoebe almost smiled. I think, she said, Lady Blanche should be invited here. Esther looked up. For receiving hours? Yes. And who else? Only those necessary. Julian's old wit flickered. Disappointing. I had already begun imagining half of London pressed against the windows. Phoebe laughed softly. No spectacle. No spectacle. Esther reached for her calling cards. Lady Blanche will come if she thinks she is being offered a private settlement. Phoebe looked toward the door, then let her think so. Lady Esther began writing the invitations. Across the room, Julian said nothing more. He did not need to. For the first time since Phoebe had left Somercote House, the next move belonged entirely to her. Lady Blanche arrived 10 minutes early. Phoebe had expected that. People who believed a private settlement awaited them rarely kept others waiting. Lady Esther's receiving room had been arranged as it always was during morning calls. Nothing suggested a tribunal. Fresh flowers stood on the mantel. Calling cards rested upon a silver tray. The curtains were open to the pale spring light, and the chairs had been placed for conversation rather than confrontation. Only the guests made the morning unusual. Madame Bisset sat near Lady Esther, visibly uncomfortable but composed. Two ladies who had been close enough to hear the exchange at the King's Theatre had accepted Esther's invitation. Sir Geoffrey Harland arrived moments after Blanche. Julian stood near the fireplace. Phoebe stood beside no one. Lady Blanche entered, saw the room, and stopped. This is hardly private. No, Phoebe said. Blanche turned toward her. Phoebe's heart beat hard, but her voice remained steady. The accusation was not private. Sir Geoffrey glanced toward Julian. Your Grace, I had understood there was to be some attempt at resolving this unfortunate business discreetly. Julian's expression was almost mild. You understood incorrectly. Blanche's mouth tightened. I have already said everything necessary. Phoebe behaved rashly. Sir Geoffrey made honorable preparations in reliance upon an understanding that had existed for some time. She then discovered his Grace's interest and chose to pretend there had been no arrangement. Phoebe did not look at Julian. She looked at Blanche. You have repeated that story in drawing rooms and at the theatre. I have stated facts. No, you have stated your conclusion. Blanche's eyes sharpened. Phoebe continued. I would like Sir Geoffrey to answer one question before anything else is shown. Sir Geoffrey drew himself upright. What question? Did I ever personally tell you that I would marry you? Silence followed. He frowned. Your aunt made your position perfectly clear. That was not my question. His face reddened slightly. Phoebe waited. No, he said at last, not in those exact words. Did I write to you accepting an offer? No. Did I authorize you to order bridal clothes? Sir Geoffrey's discomfort became irritation. I understood Lady Blanche had authority to make the arrangements. Phoebe nodded once. Thank you. Blanche stepped forward. This is absurd. Women do not always manage every practical detail of a respectable match themselves. No, Phoebe said. But they are generally expected to know that they are engaged. One of the visiting ladies lowered her eyes. Lady Blanche looked toward Julian. Surely your Grace sees what she is doing. She is turning ordinary family arrangements into some melodrama because she now has the luxury of pretending independence. Julian did not move. I see Miss Somercote asking questions. Blanche waited, as if expecting more. He gave her nothing. Phoebe turned toward Madame Bisset. Would you show Lady Blanche the order card, please? The modiste rose. She had brought the original packet herself. Phoebe had insisted upon that. The ivory swatch card had never left Madame Bisset's possession, except for the journey from her establishment to Lady Esther's house that morning. Madame untied the cord and placed the card upon the small table. The square of ivory silk caught the light. Phoebe did not touch it. Lady Esther invited the two witnesses closer. Phoebe pointed first to the date. This order was placed 3 days before Lady Blanche informed me that there was supposedly to be a marriage. Then to the notation. My measurements were copied from an older morning gown order. I was never measured for a bridal gown. Then to the names. Lady Blanche gave the instructions. Sir Geoffrey paid the deposit. Sir Geoffrey's jaw tightened. Phoebe looked at him. Where is my signature? He said nothing. Madame Bisset answered instead. There is none. Blanche turned sharply. That proves nothing. You knew the gown was being made. Madame Bisset looked nervous again, but this time she did not retreat. Miss Somercote did not know until she came to my rooms. She was told there would be alterations to an evening gown. When she saw the bridal silk, she refused the fitting immediately. Lady Blanche stared at her. Madame continued. She did not choose the silk. She did not approve the design. She did not put on the bodice. Phoebe looked around the room. No one gasped. No one needed to. The facts were too simple. Sir Geoffrey had paid for a bridal gown. Blanche had ordered it. Phoebe had not consented. Blanche's voice became brittle. You had no prospects. I secured a respectable future for you. Phoebe met her gaze. You secured the future you preferred. I fed and housed you for years, and I was grateful. Blanche flinched as though gratitude made the refusal more offensive. Phoebe continued. But gratitude was never permission to choose my husband. Sir Geoffrey stepped toward the table. If Miss Somercote wishes to make the matter plain, then it is plain. I will not press a claim where none is wanted. It was not an apology. Phoebe had not expected one, but it was enough to end the fiction. She said, Then I expect you will not repeat that I broke an accepted engagement. Sir Geoffrey hesitated. Then, with the room listening, no. Phoebe turned to Blanche. Her aunt's face had gone pale with anger. You will regret humiliating your own family. Phoebe felt the old reflex for one heartbeat. Soften, repair, make the room comfortable. Then she let it pass. You made the claim publicly. I corrected it publicly. Blanche looked toward Julian one last time. Perhaps she still expected him to finish the scene for Phoebe. He did not. Lady Esther said quietly, I believe that settles the matter. Blanche left without taking tea. Sir Geoffrey followed several minutes later. The witnesses remained only long enough to exchange the kind of restrained farewells that ensured the truth would travel faster than the original rumor ever had. Madame Bisset returned the swatch card to its packet and took it with her. Phoebe watched the door close behind the last caller. Only then did she breathe fully. Julian crossed the room. He stopped several feet away. You were magnificent. Phoebe gave him a tired look. That sounds dangerously close to praise. I can withdraw it. No. The answer came too quickly. His mouth curved. There was the man from the walk again, the wit, but no longer used as a shield. Lady Esther glanced between them. I have correspondence upstairs that suddenly requires my immediate attention. Phoebe almost protested. Esther was already gone, leaving the adjoining door open. Julian looked at Phoebe. May I tell you something now? She knew what he meant, not the old decision. Something changed. Yes, his expression lost its humor. What I wanted before you left Somercote House was the hope of marrying you. What I know now is simpler and more frightening. Phoebe's pulse quickened. I love you. He said it without ceremony, without rank, without asking anything in the same breath. Phoebe looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. I love you too. The relief in his face was so unguarded that it touched her more deeply than any polished declaration could have done. He took one small step nearer. I am not going to assume that means marriage. It does not. He nodded solemnly. Phoebe let him suffer for half a second. Then she added, but you may court me. Julian exhaled. Thank God. She laughed. He smiled, then grew serious again. May I kiss you? Phoebe felt warmth rise into her cheeks. This time there was no room full of witnesses, no arrangement made in advance, no one answering for her. Yes, Julian moved closer only after the word. Phoebe stepped toward him. His hand rose carefully to her cheek. The kiss was gentle, brief, and unmistakably chosen. When they parted, Phoebe did not step away at once. Julian rested his forehead lightly against hers. Do you know? He murmured. This is the first decision involving you that I have made today without getting into trouble. Phoebe smiled. That is because you finally asked first. His laugh was quiet. Phoebe looked toward the closed door through which Blanche had left. The lie was finished. What came next had not been arranged by anyone. That was precisely why she was ready to discover it. 8 weeks later, Phoebe stood once more before a length of ivory silk. This time, she had chosen it. Madame Bisset had brought 3 possibilities to Lady Esther's house. One was too heavily embroidered. One had a sheen Phoebe disliked. The third was simpler, soft beneath the fingers, elegant without asking to be admired before the woman wearing it. Phoebe touched the edge. This one. Madame smiled. I thought you might say so. No one told you. No. Phoebe smiled back. Good. The wedding gown that followed was not grand by ducal standards. That had been Julian's first lesson in courtship. He had asked what she wanted. Then, when Phoebe said small, he had believed her. No enormous celebration had appeared through some secret arrangement. No guest list had expanded because the Duke of Keldhurst possessed the influence to fill a chapel twice over. No jewel case had been delivered with the expectation that rank required gratitude. Julian had courted her exactly as he promised. Calling cards, walks with Esther. Dinners where he sometimes made Phoebe laugh so badly she had to look down at her plate. Letters written even when he had seen her that morning. He had also learned, gradually, that asking did not mean asking every 30 seconds whether she approved of his existence. Phoebe had informed him of that during the 3rd week. You may occasionally make an ordinary decision, Julian. He had looked relieved. May I select my own neckcloth tomorrow? I shall consider it. Their courtship had not erased what came before it. Lady Blanche's public withdrawal of the accusation had travelled through the same circles where she had first spread it. Sir Geoffrey did not call again. More important than either consequence, Phoebe's name had ceased to be attached to an engagement she had never accepted. Lady Blanche herself sent one letter. It contained no apology. It did contain a restrained acknowledgement that Phoebe had chosen a different course, and that Blanche would no longer speak of Sir Geoffrey as an injured party. Phoebe read it once. Then she put it away. That was enough. She did not need Blanche's understanding in order to be free of Blanche's judgment. Her interview with Mrs. Vale had taken place as planned. The position was respectable. The lady was kind. Phoebe could have accepted it. Instead, after several days of thought, she chose Lady Esther's offer to remain as a paid literary and correspondence assistant. The work suited her better. It also paid her directly. Phoebe kept the first coins she earned in a small purse of her own. Julian never asked what she did with them. That mattered more than he knew. On the morning of the wedding, Phoebe sat before the mirror in Lady Esther's dressing room, while the house moved quietly around her. The ivory gown lay ready. Phoebe opened her reticule. Inside was the small carved boxwood needle case. She turned it once in her hand. Her mother had used it for years. Phoebe remembered watching her mend cuffs, turn hems, rescue ribbons from dresses that had outlived their fashion. Mend what you choose to keep. Phoebe opened the case and took out one needle. Her maid looked puzzled. Is something loose, miss? No. Phoebe lifted the inner hem of the wedding gown. With a short length of thread, she made one small stitch. It changed nothing. No one would see it. That was precisely why she wanted it. One stitch placed by her own hand in clothes she had chosen for a marriage she had accepted herself. Phoebe tied the thread securely. Then she returned the needle to the boxwood case. Lady Esther, standing in the doorway, had watched without interrupting. Your mother? Phoebe nodded. Esther came closer. She would have liked Julian. Phoebe glanced at her. You sound very certain. I am his sister. I am permitted unreasonable confidence. Phoebe laughed. Then her expression softened. I think she would have liked the way he learned. Esther reached for Phoebe's hand. Yes, she said. So do I. The chapel was small enough that Phoebe could see every face without turning her head. There were family friends, a handful of Julian's relations. Lady Esther, no Lady Blanche, no Sir Geoffrey, no curious crowd drawn by scandal. Julian waited near the altar. For perhaps the first time in his life, he looked incapable of making a joke. Phoebe found that unexpectedly touching. When she reached him, he offered his hand. Not possession, not rescue, only an invitation. Phoebe placed hers in it. The ceremony was simple. The vows were spoken clearly. When Julian's voice caught once, almost imperceptibly, Phoebe squeezed his fingers. His eyes lifted to hers. There was the man beneath the wit, the one she had learned to trust. Afterward, when they were briefly alone near the chapel door, Julian bent his head. I love you, Phoebe smiled. I love you too. He kissed her gently. No urgency, no audience. No uncertainty about whether she wanted him near. Phoebe touched his cheek before they parted. You look relieved. I have spent 8 weeks fearing you might develop better judgment. I did. He blinked. Phoebe let the silence stretch. Then she smiled. And married you anyway. His laugh followed her out into the spring light. The carriage for Keldhurst waited beyond the chapel yard. Phoebe stopped before it. For one moment, memory overlapped with the present. Another carriage, another damp step, one small reticule. Nothing settled, no home certain, no future except the one she refused. Now, her reticule rested beside her traveling cloak. Inside it was the boxwood needle case, her own purse, letters she wanted to keep. Nothing that had been forced upon her. Julian climbed into the carriage first. Then he turned and held out his hand. Phoebe looked at it. He lifted one brow. No slipping required this time. She laughed. Then she placed her hand in his. Not because the step was damp. Not because she required balance. Because she wanted to hold him. Julian understood. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. Once they were seated, the door remained open while the final luggage was secured. Phoebe looked toward London. She had once believed leaving Somercote House had meant stepping into emptiness. Instead, it had been the first decision that belonged entirely to her. Julian followed her gaze. You are very quiet, I was thinking. Dangerous. Extremely. He smiled. Phoebe turned toward him. You did decide first. His expression softened. Yes, and it took you some time to learn the difference between deciding what you hoped for and deciding someone else's future. A humiliating education. Phoebe tilted her head. Useful, though. Very. Then we're both educated. His old wit returned fully then. I shall inform Parliament that the curriculum is complete. Phoebe laughed and leaned closer. Julian did not assume. Even now, he waited that fraction of a second. Phoebe closed the distance herself. Their kiss was quiet and affectionate, shared before the carriage began to move. When they separated, she left her hand in his. Julian looked down at their joined fingers, then back at her. "I love you," Phoebe answered without hesitation. "I love you too." The carriage door closed. The horses started forward. London began to fall behind them. Phoebe's reticule rested open beside her, the carved boxwood needle case visible within. Her other hand remained intertwined with Julian's. She had once walked away, carrying almost nothing. Now she left for Keldhurst, carrying exactly what she had chosen. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.